Welcome to the Journey Church podcast. We are really glad you're here. Whether you're listening on your drive to work, at the gym, or somewhere in the middle of a busy week, our hope is simple, that today's message encourages you, challenges you, and helps you take one more step toward Jesus. If you enjoy what you hear, be sure to subscribe so you never miss a new episode. Now, here's this week's message.
Let's jump into today, and some of you are wondering what in the world I'm doing with a ladder up here. We'll get to this in a minute. Some of you have been around here long enough, I already know what he's talking about today, and we'll get to that in just a minute. Today is the last Sunday that I get to share a message with you as the lead pastor. I'm sure I'll be back at some point, but as lead pastor, next week I'll be here, Jen and I will be here. It'll be our last Sunday. And by the way, let me just answer a question I keep getting asked. Everybody keeps coming up to me and saying, oh yeah, we're going to miss you, Matt. Is there any way you could leave your wife and your kids here? And the answer is no, okay? I am going to take them, but I do realize that's the bigger hole. That's what everybody's going to miss. So you can hear Jen sing one more time next week. I've been asked that a bunch. But yeah, we're excited for next week for this reason. I'm going to save all of the thank yous and the appreciation and the gratitude for next week. Today I was thinking about what I wanted to share with you, and honestly, it wasn't hard to figure out. I want to talk to you for the next few minutes about the thing that I think is most important for all of us to remember. It's been the things most important for 21 years for us to remember. I think it'll be the things most important for you to remember for the next 21 years. And for those of you who maybe you're not a Jesus follower or you don't call Journey your church yet, I'm so glad you're here, because what we're going to talk about today is what I believe makes this church and these people so unique. The thing that makes us unique as a church is not our building, and we've got an amazing building. I'm really grateful for that. Watching Chiago and all the folks at Red Church set up and tear down, I was really grateful we have a building now. We don't have to do that. So all that's great, and I'm so grateful we have this, but that's not what makes us unique. For 75% of our history, we didn't have our own building, so that's not it. It's not everything we do in the community, and I absolutely love that. I'm so proud of you for the ways that you invest your time and your money, and you have for so many years, and you'll keep doing that. But that's not what makes us most unique. It's not the fact that we have amazing music and these musicians are incredible. It's not our incredible kids' environments, and they're tremendous. It's the thing we're going to talk about today that is and has been and hopefully will continue to be at the core of who you are as a church and what you do. 21 years ago, when the 7 of us first started this church, we did it because of this thing we're going to talk about today. We did not start a church because Murray needed another church. When we started this church, there were over 100 churches in Cowway County alone. That's a lot of churches in one little county. So we didn't do it because, we thought the county needed another church. We did it because we felt like this community needed a different kind of church. And I was actually asked this last weekend by one of the Brazilians. They said, why did you guys decide to start a church? And it wasn't because we had some concept or idea or theory that we were like, oh, let's try that and see if that'll work. That wasn't it. It was way more personal. We did it because we all had friends. We all had friends who were curious about Jesus, who were interested in exploring faith. We all had friends who had a lot of questions. They did not feel comfortable coming to church. As a matter of fact, when we would invite them to the churches we were going to, they would immediately respond with, well, that's not for me. And it's not for me because when I show up, I'm not going to feel like I'm a part. Everybody there already knows each other. And it's not that they're not going to be nice, but I'm not going to feel like I belong there. And it's not for me because when I go there, I've done it before. I've tried it before. I can't understand what they're talking about. I don't know what to do with it. I don't know how it applies to me. And I don't know what next step I should take. It doesn't make sense to me. It's like all the people who are there know how everything works and they understand it all. I don't understand it all. This is what our friends were telling us. And the problem with that, when they were looking at us saying, church isn't for me, church is for church people, well, there was a big problem with that. There was a problem that was so big that we decided it was worth it to do whatever we had to do to try to create a different kind of place. And so today, in part 3 of our series, Worth It, I want to explain to you what that is. Here's the problem we were trying to solve. If church is for church people, then that means Christianity is for church people. And if Christianity is for church people, it means Jesus is for church people. And we know that's not true. Nothing could be further from the truth. When Jesus was on this earth, and you can read any of the accounts of his life and you'll see this, People who were nothing like Jesus, the most irreligious, unchurched people in his day, liked Jesus, and he liked them back. They loved being around him. He loved being around them. And yet somehow, somewhere along the way, we have lost that. That is not how people who are irreligious or far from Jesus or unchurched in some way, that is not how they think about churches or church people today. They don't feel like they belong. They don't want to be a part. And most of the time, they don't even feel like we like them. It is not how it was with Jesus. And so we started this place because we felt like there ought to be a way to create a place that reflects the purpose and the personality of Jesus. In other words, there ought to be a place and there ought to be a way to make people who aren't sure and they've got questions and doubts, to help people like our friends show up and be like, I'm glad I'm there, I want to come back, and they're glad I'm there, and I feel like I belong, even if I don't believe the way they believe. The illustration that I have used is my favorite one. The illustration I've used off and on over the years is most churches feel like a ladder with all the bottom rungs missing. And here's what I mean by that. If you've ever had an experience with a family member or a friend that you care about and you love that's far from God, and they decide to come check out a church or they go try a church somewhere, you know what this feels like. When they walk in, it feels like, well, all the people who are there, all the people who are church people, they're way up here because we know what we're doing. You know, we've walked through, we know what happens on Sunday. We know where to sit and where to park and everything. And they assume, and this isn't always true, but they assume we understand all the language, you know, whatever that pastor's talking about and all those big words he's throwing around. They assume we understand that, and they assume that we can figure out all the stuff. So it feels to them like we're way up here. But meanwhile, they're just starting out. They have their questions, they have their doubts, they're down here at the bottom. And when they walk into a typical church, there are no bottom rungs for them. It feels like, well, I would love to know God's for me. I would love to know Jesus is personal like they're talking about. But I don't even know where to start. I would love to have the confidence that God loves me the way they seem to think God loves them. I don't even know where this thing starts. And when you have no bottom rungs on the ladder, people make the assumption, well, church is for church people, which means God must be for them, but he must not be for me. And they give up and they walk away. That is what we had watched our friends experience. That is what I've watched people experience my entire life. And it's why we started the church, because we wanted to try to solve this problem. Now, here's the thing you have to understand about this problem. This is not a new problem. This is something that's been going on as long as the church has been in existence. Matter of fact, it feels like about 30 minutes after Jesus left earth, Jesus' followers started pulling the bottom rungs out of the ladder. They started making it complicated and difficult. And part of the reason for that was this. The early Jesus followers were primarily all Jewish, which means they had grown up in Judaism, their religion, and they knew all the stuff about Judaism, the law of Moses, and they knew about the temple and sacrifices. They kind of knew how to do all the stuff. They've been doing it for centuries. And so Jesus comes along, and he introduces a brand new way, and we talked about this in the last series in June, Losing Your Religion. He introduces a brand new way for people to connect with God. And these Jewish Jesus followers embraced that. The problem was, and I understand this, it was hard. They couldn't let go of all their old ways, of all the Judaism, of all the stuff that they'd grown up being taught was the way to connect with God. And so they held on to Jesus, and they held on to their Judaism, and they mixed the two. And it got to the point that they began telling people, well, you can't follow Jesus unless you're also Jewish. You can't follow Jesus unless you also follow the law of Moses. And it got really complicated really quickly. Meanwhile, there's a guy you've heard of by the name of Paul, the Apostle Paul, his friend Barnabas, some of his other friends. They started going where nobody else would go. They started going to non-Jewish people in non-Jewish cities, and they began telling them about Jesus. And these non-Jewish people began following Jesus, and they embraced what Jesus had done for them through his death and resurrection. And it was extraordinary. They found it to be such good news, they started doing it by the hundreds and the thousands, and eventually the tens of thousands. The problem was, when the Jewish people, who didn't even think they should go tell non-Jewish people because they didn't think God cared about them that much, when the Jewish people hear what's happening, they're like, whoa, Paul, you can't tell them all they have to do is, just trust Jesus and accept his forgiveness. It's more complicated than that. They need to do that, and this is what the Jewish Jesus followers would say, and they also need to become Jewish. They need to follow our law of Moses. They need to do all the stuff that we have to do. And until they do that, they can't be part of the church. Until they do that, they're not really Jesus followers. It was like these Jewish Christians were way up here saying, if you want to be one of us, good luck. You got to jump from down there all the way up here on this rung. And until you do it, you're not a part. And for 15 years, this was not a quick problem. For 15 years, they debated this. For 15 years, they argued about this. For 15 years, there was so much tension and conflict. And it finally came to a point where they all gathered in Jerusalem. And they decided they were going to have a big debate, and they were going to make a decision once and for all. What was required to follow Jesus? So, Luke, who wrote the account we call Acts, it's a history of the early church. Luke records for us exactly what happens with all this tension, with all this conflict, at this pivotal moment that would shape the future of where the message of Jesus went. Here's how he describes it in Acts 15. He says, he's talking about Paul and his friend Barnabas and his other friends. When they came to Jerusalem, they were welcomed by the church and the apostles and the elders, to whom, he says, they reported everything God had done through them. So Paul and Barnabas and the rest of the guys are like, no, we got to tell you all the stuff that God has done among non-Jewish people. I know you didn't think God loved them as much, and you didn't think God would actually work among them. No, there's been some extraordinary things happen. They start laying out all the things that they've seen God do. And it was remarkable. If you've never read it, it's worth reading the first several chapters of Acts up to Acts 15, and you can read for yourself some of this stuff that happened. And you would think that after they described all the stories, told everything, you would think that all of these Jewish Jesus followers would have said, well, that's enough evidence, that's enough proof. We'll put the bottom rungs on. In other words, we're not going to require people to be Jewish in order to follow Jesus. But that's not how they were thinking about it. Luke tells us this happened next. Then some of the believers who belonged to the party of the Pharisees stood up in this meeting. Now, for those of you who don't know, the Pharisees were part of a group that was Jewish religious leaders, a Jewish religious council. The Pharisees were some of the people who were responsible for having Jesus crucified 15 years earlier. Which brings up a really interesting question. How in the world can you be part of a group who had Jesus killed, and now you find them just a few years later following Jesus and they're part of the church? That didn't happen because of anything Jesus had taught. It happened because they knew they had had him killed, and then they saw him alive. And they decided, we were wrong. Give them credit for that. We were wrong. And so they've eventually begun following Jesus. They become part of the church, which is great. But these Pharisees were the ones responsible to make sure all people followed Judaism, that they knew how to, follow the law of Moses and live by all the commands. And so they're the ones going, we can't let go of that. We're going to mix the two. It's going to be Jesus and our Judaism. And so they go on and on and on. And they're very clear about it. Here's what they said in the meeting that day. They said the Gentiles, all the non-Jewish people, Paul had been talking to, Barnabas had been talking to, the Gentiles must be circumcised and required to keep the law of Moses. I would call that a pretty high bar, wouldn't you? Can you imagine? You're a non-Jewish person. You start coming to church. You're like, I think I want to follow Jesus. They're like, great, there's a little tent out back for you men to have a little surgery. Snip, snip. It's like, what are you talking about? They're like, yeah, we're not making this easy. You got to be a Jew. This is exactly what was going on. They're going, you got to become a Jew. You got to fully embrace the law of Moses. If you want to be a Jesus follower, it's not as easy as just putting your trust in Jesus. It's not as easy as accepting his forgiveness. It's not as easy as being a part of his family. No. You can't just accept the invitation. You got to jump way up here and do everything the law of Moses says, and then we'll let you in the club. This is what they were doing. They were ripping all the bottom rungs out of the ladder. So, they have this debate, and I'm going to let you read it for yourself. It's worth reading. It's pretty fascinating. Peter, you've heard of Peter. Peter obviously had a lot of clout. Peter stands up in the meeting, and he's a Jew, and he grew up in all of this, but Peter's like, whoa. He says, God's made it very clear to all of us that he accepts non-Jewish people just like Jewish people. If you want to read where Peter learned that, it took him a while, but in Acts 10, He had an experience where God made that clear to him. And so Peter looks at all of these Pharisees, and he's like, why would we ever place on people a burden that Jesus didn't place? Why would we place on them a standard and expectation Jesus never introduced? Why would we do something that Jesus said we did not need to do? You see, Peter had heard Jesus say, I didn't come to abolish the law of Moses. Jesus said, I have come to fulfill it. In other words, Jesus had taught Peter and his other friends, it's not that the law of Moses is bad, it's just served its purpose and run its course. If it's a homework assignment, I've completed it. If it's a plane, I have landed it. If it's a trip, we've arrived at the destination. Like, you don't need to worry about the law of Moses anymore. I've come to do something brand new, which is why the writer of Hebrews called the law of Moses outdated and obsolete. It wasn't bad, it just wasn't needed anymore. Peter had heard Jesus say that. It's still been hard for him to believe it. But he had gotten to the point where he's like, guys, we don't need to keep following that. Jesus has introduced something new and better for all of us. And then he made this point, which is a valid point. He looks at these Jewish Jesus followers and he's like, have any of us been able to follow the law of Moses well? Could any of us meet that standard? And they're all like, well, no, actually, we're not very good at it. He's like, yeah, why in the world would we expect non-Jewish people to do something we can't do anyway? We're trusting in Jesus because we know we couldn't keep the law of Moses perfectly. Why would we ask them to do it? But even that's not enough to convince them. They keep debating back and forth, until James, the brother of Jesus, stands up. Now, I don't have time to go into all this backstory, but it's fascinating because James was not a Jesus follower until after the resurrection, which makes perfect sense. I don't know what it would take your brother to convince you he was God, but it would take a resurrection, I would imagine, you know? So he's like, I'm not buying it until he sees him dead and alive, and he's like, I guess he is who he's claimed to be. So at that point, James goes all in, okay? And at this place, in Acts 15, he is now the point leader of the church in Jerusalem. He's like the lead pastor. And so he's watching this debate go back and forth. And you can imagine when James speaks and starts talking about what his brother taught, they're like, okay, well, he knows, you know. So once they get done with all of this debate, James stands up. He kind of puts an end to it. And he says something that has been the heartbeat of our church for 21 years. It's the thing we've talked about over and over and over again. It's what drives everything that we do. James says, I've heard your arguments. I know what both sides are saying. But I also listened to my brother. And I know what my brother said, and I know what my brother taught, and I know what my brother modeled. And so I'm making a decision, and we're all going to follow it. And his decision was this. It is my judgment, therefore, that we should not make it difficult for the Gentiles, these non-Jewish people who are turning to God. James is like, my brother made it simple. Why would we complicate it? My brother said everybody is invited and everybody is included to have a relationship with him. Why would we suddenly add on requirements and tell them they've got to become Jewish and follow the law of Moses? There's no point in that. We're done with that. We're going to put the bottom rungs back on the ladder. And to the credit of all the Jewish people in the room that day, they listened to James, they listened to Peter, they listened to Paul. And they no longer required people to become Jewish in order to be a part of the church, which was great news for all of us because most of us probably wouldn't be here if they hadn't made that decision. But if you fast forward and read a little bit of church history, it doesn't take long before you find the church finding other ways to complicate things, other ways to start ripping the bottom rungs out of the ladder. They started finding other ways to make it difficult for people to turn to God. And churches today are still doing this, which begs the question, why? Why? Why do we always seem to find ways to make it easy for us once we're up here, but hard for anybody who's a little further behind? Well, I don't know that I've ever explained it this way, but I want to try to illustrate why we have a tendency to do this. See, the gravitational pull of every church is to focus inward. In other words, it's just natural for churches to pay attention to insiders and forget about outsiders. Because who's here? Insiders. Once you're here, you're an insider. So why would we think about people who aren't here? But when you do that, you start ripping the bottom rungs out of the ladder because you start focusing on this. You start focusing on what people need to know and people need to do. We start talking about here's what you need to know and here's what you need to do. We start thinking about what do they need to know? What do they need to do? And we forget about how it makes people feel. And whenever you forget about how something is making a person feel, whenever you do not prioritize or value that, you will inevitably rip the bottom rungs out of the ladder. I'll give you some examples. Here's some obvious ones. It's really easy for you to show up on Sunday and me think to myself, my job is to make sure you know what you need to know from the Bible and you do what it says to do. Some of you grew up in churches like this. They were very clear on what you needed to know, and they were very clear on what you needed to do. They did not care about how you felt. They didn't care about how they presented it, how it made you feel by the way they presented it. And so because of that, you walked out feeling less than every time. You walked out feeling like you weren't good enough. You walked out feeling like there were people up here at the top of the ladder and you didn't feel like you could get up there. And you didn't know how to behave well enough or to jump high enough to get here. Because it just seemed like they knew more and they did better than you did. When all you do is focus on the know and the do, and you forget the feel, you end up with a very legalistic, rules-based religion. You lose what it means to have a relationship with Jesus. The difference is when you go, no, there's some things we need to know. And let's be clear about what we need to do to live it out, to apply it. Knowledge is a good first step, but information doesn't do anything to change our lives. Information and transformation, or application rather, that's gonna start changing our lives. But you'll never apply what you know unless you feel like it's possible for you. Unless you feel like everybody's invited and everybody's included. Unless what you know and what you do is explained in a way that makes you feel like it's accessible to you. That's the difference. That's how you put a bottom rung on the ladder. I'll give you some examples that aren't quite as obvious or you might not think of. But imagine this. Imagine if every Sunday when you showed up, imagine if every Sunday when a new person showed up and you pulled in the parking lot, the only thing that parking lot team cared about was you knowing where to park and you doing it the way they said to do it. Imagine that was your experience. And they didn't care how you felt in the process. They just wanted you to know where to park and to make sure you park just like they want them to. You would not walk out every week feeling great about that. You wouldn't. Matter of fact, it would be frustrating to you. You know why? Because this is not the word you would use, but you would just feel it. You would know they valued efficiency over hospitality. You would know that. And anytime you value efficiency over hospitality, you're ripping bottom rungs out of the ladder. Every time you value efficiency over hospitality, you're sending a message to people that who they are doesn't matter as much as them doing what you want them to do. So, when you pull in the parking lot, you should experience all three. And if you're like, oh my gosh, I don't want to park there. I want to back in over here. I want to pull over there. Our parking team should be going, go ahead, you little rebel. Go ahead, Park somewhere else. It may mess up the flow of people. It's okay. Just go park. Why? Because you should feel valued. And that has to trump this. The same thing's true when you walk through the doors. Listen, we could minimize the number of volunteers we need considerably. When you walk through the doors, we want you to know where to go and we want you to go where you need to go. That's what we want. We don't even need guest services people to do that. We'll just put some signs up. It would be way more efficient. We'll just put some signs up that point and make sure you don't miss it. But that would not make you feel the way you should feel when you walk in our doors. That wouldn't make you feel like you were at home. That wouldn't make you feel like you belonged. That wouldn't make you feel like there are people there who are excited to see me today. We could be efficient at the cost of hospitality, and we'd be ripping the bottom rungs out of the ladder. And people who walked in here for the first time, and honestly, some of you, it wouldn't take long if this is all we had for you to go, I just don't feel like this is home for me. The same's true with checking kids in. The same's true with the experience kids have over there. The same's true with the experience you have here. The same's true, I'll just mention this real quick. The same's true for all of you who volunteer, and so many of you volunteer. The same thing's true. Listen, when you volunteer here, if all we care about is you knowing what you need to do and you doing what you should do, you're not going to volunteer very long. You have to feel like we care, that we care about you more than we care about what you do. You should feel that way. You should expect to feel that way, that you're valued more than just what you can do on a Sunday morning. But we could get way more efficient. We could say, no. What's the most efficient way to use the least amount of time to get it done? Well, let's find the people who know what they need to know and can do what they need to do best, and they don't really need any rehearsal. They don't really need any prep. They don't really need any direction. Okay, those are the people. We're just going to minimize the time down where they can just show up and do it. And if you're one of these people, you would like that. But for somebody who doesn't know yet what you know or can't do what you do quite as well just yet, it's absolutely going to make them feel excluded. It's efficient, but it's exclusive. And there won't be a place because you're ripping the bottom rungs out. And so before long, you'll have a very small group of people over here who know and do. You ever seen this? A very small group of people who know and do, and they think they're all that because they know and do. And nobody else will feel like they can be a part of anything. This is why the bottom rungs get ripped out. Because we focus on this and we forget about that. So, 21 years ago when we started our church, and for the last 21 years, this is what we've been passionate about doing. We have not always gotten it right. I don't know if we're as good at it today as we have been in the past, but we need to be. This has to be the heartbeat. This has to be the thing that if you call Journey your home, this is what you care about so much. That no matter how hard it is, no matter what it's going to take, that you're going to make sure bottom rungs are here on this ladder. That you're going to make sure, can you hear that scraping sound? That sounds good, doesn't it? That you're going to make sure that this doesn't just feel like a church for church people. That's a church for everybody. That this isn't a place just for people who've already got it figured out. That people who have questions and doubts or have bad experiences, they're not sure. This has got to be a place where they can come, and when they walk in here, they go, oh, there's a step for me. This makes sense to me. There's a place for me. It's not just the people way up here who seem to have it all figured out, and I could never be like one of them. They have to feel like they belong to. That there's a place for all of us, and there's a rung on the ladder, a step all of us can take. So, as I wrap up, I want to invite you, if you call this your church, I want to invite you to do 4 things. It is the same 4 things I have asked people to do for 21 years because it's best for your spiritual growth, and it's how we keep all the bottom rungs on the ladder. I want to encourage you to invite. To invite. Because your invitation could lead to somebody's transformation. Let me ask you, who is it that you pray for, that you love, that you care about, that you genuinely are friends with, who's far from God? Who is it in your life? It's not in church. That you're like, oh man, I'm praying for them like crazy. And I'm hoping I get an opportunity to invite them, and I'm hoping that one day they will say yes. I'll tell you this. If you don't have anybody, you don't even think this is important. I know you don't. Because you're here. All it takes, though, is having a family member or friend that you're praying for, that you're hoping will show up at church. And you know what I know? The first time they come, This will mean everything to you. Everything. The first time they come, you quite honestly won't care if they walk out knowing everything they need to know and doing what they need to do. You will most care about how they feel. You will. And you'll want them to feel like they belong and they're at home. And that's important because if they don't feel like they belong and they're at home, then they'll never listen to learn what they need to know. They'll never take a step to do what they need to do. Suddenly, this will be the most important thing in the world to you when somebody you love walks in here. So if you're not inviting, you got to pay attention to who God's put in your life. And you got to invite. You got to serve. You got to serve. You know why? Your little bit of time will make a lifetime of difference in somebody's life. Every single one of these rungs needs to be staffed with people, volunteers who get it, who understand, and who want to make sure everybody not just knows and does what they should do to make their life better, but they feel like they're at home and they're valued. We need people on every rung of the ladder serving the folks who come in here. Now, real quick, some of you haven't served here. You've had your reasons. You're busy. You got all the stuff. And one of the things that I've heard for 21 years people say is, well, y'all don't really need me. Everything is great over there. Let me tell you why everything seems to go great over here. Because we're great at covering our gaps. That's why everything seems to go great over here. It's been this way for 21 years. There are opportunities. There are openings. Like, we need you involved. More importantly, the people who are going to walk in the doors and need bottom rungs on the ladder need you involved. And when you do your little bitty part, when you give your little bit of time, you help create this for them. So go on the app, pick a serve now, and sign up. I hope a ton of you over the next few weeks go through Serve Now and get involved. You will feel more at home here. You will feel more like you belong. You will grow more spiritually. And you will also help the people who are going to walk through these doors. Third, I want to invite you to give. To keep doing what I've taught for 21 years. Because this doesn't happen on accident. You have to fund it. So would you be a priority, percentage, progressive giver? And finally, I want to invite you to connect. To spend time connecting with God. You don't have to be perfect, but more days than not every week, would you carve out a little bit of time? Because if you don't connect with God, you will never care about these people the way Jesus does. We give you devotionals. You can just get on the app and read the devotional and spend a little bit of time reading the scripture. Would you just do that 4 days a week? And then would you figure out how to connect with each other, to go to a short-term group, to get in a small group, maybe just gather a group of friends will help you figure out how to do it on your own. Let me say this and we'll wrap up. This matters. And it doesn't just matter because of you. It matters because of the people that you care about who may just walk through these doors in the next year. And if I can be transparent, you know what typically happens whenever a founding pastor leaves? What typically happens is all four of these things go down. People stop inviting, fewer people serve, giving goes down, and fewer people connect. Now, I don't expect that's going to happen here because as far as I'm concerned, you're the best church in the world. But I will give you a little warning. If Jared tells me that's what happened, I'm coming back and kicking you in the tail. I'm telling you right now. Because you're not coming for me. What in the world? That's the dumbest reason to come to church ever. Jared's going to be better than me anyway. So there's no reason to stop doing what you're doing. There is a reason to do more of it. Because a new season brings new momentum and new opportunities. So, don't just be a church for people up here. Absolutely, if you're up here, there's steps here at this church. There are ways that we help you grow spiritually. But also be a church for the people who are down here, who are just figuring it out. Be a church for everybody, because everybody matters to God, whether God matters to them or not. So they should matter to us too. Let me pray for us. Jesus, thanks for making it really simple for us. I think sometimes we forget that you put all the bottom rungs on the ladder. Everybody's invited. Everybody's included. Everybody has the same way to have a relationship with you. You made it so simple for us. Don't let us not care about the people behind us who still have questions and doubts. Don't let us ignore the people you brought into our lives who are trying to figure it out. Don't let us forget about the people all around us who live every day without the confidence that you love them, that you're with them and you're for them. Help us to continue to be a place that does not make it difficult for people to turn to you. And it's in your name we pray. Amen.
Thanks for listening to the Journey Church podcast. If today's message encouraged you, we'd love to help you keep taking your next step. You can find more messages, resources, and updates through the Journey app on our YouTube channel or at journeycallaway.com. And if you're ever in the Murray area, we'd love to meet you in person. We gather every Sunday at 9 a.m. and 10:30 a.m. Remember, God is for you, and so are we. We'll see you next time.